sing this out. And through you, I can do anything. Well, I can do all things, 'cause it's you who gives me strength. And nothing is impossible. Through you, blind eyes are open, and strongholds are broken. Come on, sing it out. I am living by, you said, nothing is impossible. Sing that out. I believe in you. I believe. Come on, we sing that out. I believe. And I believe in you. I believe. Oh, I believe in you. And through you, I can do anything. Come on. I can do all things, 'cause it's you who gets me strength. We say, nothing is impossible. Through you, blind eyes are open, strongholds are broken. I am living by faith. Nothing is impossible. And I believe. Oh, I believe in you. I believe in you. Come on, lift up a shout of praise.
How about you take a seat and let's get started. You ready for this? Deuteronomy chapter 28, beginning at verse 1 says, "And if you faithfully obey the voice of the Lord your God, being careful to do all his commandments that I command you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations of the earth. And all these blessings shall come upon you and overtake you if you obey the voice of the Lord your God. Blessed shall you be in the city, And blessed shall you be in the field. Blessed shall be the fruit of your womb and the fruit of the ground and the fruit of your cattle, the increase of your herds and the young of your flock. Blessed shall be your basket and your kneading bowl. Blessed shall you be when you come in, and blessed shall you be when you go out. See, sometimes when people speak this over you, you just think they're giving you platitudes. No. That's the gospel they're declaring over your life. The Lord will cause your enemies who rise against you to be defeated before you. They shall come out against you one way. They're coming. And flee before you 7 ways. And they're going. The Lord will command the blessing on you in your barns and in all that you undertake. And he will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. The Lord will establish you as a people holy to himself, as he has sworn to you, if you keep the commandments of the Lord your God and walk in his ways. And all the peoples of the earth shall see that you are called by the name of the Lord, and they shall be afraid of you. And the Lord will make you abound in prosperity, in the fruit of your womb and in the fruit of your livestock and in the fruit of your ground, within the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to give you. The Lord will open to you his good treasury, the heavens, to give the rain to your land in its season, and to bless all the work of your hands. And you shall lend to many nations, but you shall not borrow. And the Lord will make you the head and not the tail. And you shall only go up and not down, if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you today, being careful to do them. You know, there was something interesting about all those blessings. All those blessings were commanded in the place where he was calling them to go. There is a place where you have been called to be. And in that place where God has called you to be, there are blessings for you. The blessings don't exist out there, and they don't exist over there. The blessings exist in the place where the Lord your God has called you. And he has taken you and planted you. And so now it's time for you to prosper. See, let me explain to you how I got here. God does amazing things to bring you from a place where you were to the place where you are called to be. It's not as confusing as we sometimes like to make it. We sometimes look at the gospel and following the Spirit of God like it's some puzzle, and we're just trying to, God will make it clear to you what he wants you to do. That pathway that God has for you, it's not a confusing path. It is an obvious place where you have to walk away from him to miss it, but it's right in front of you if you'll pay attention. So here's how I showed up. My mom and my dad fell in love. I'm sorry. So on November the 17th last year, I was just praying before a Sunday morning service. That was a Saturday night. And I'm just asking God to do the things that we always ask God to do. Because when we come to church, we need something more than just what we bring. When we come into his house, we need his presence in the house so that everybody that came here for something from him will receive it. And so I was praying that God would be here. And in the middle of that prayer, I began to just go and pray some things that I didn't know how to pray. So rather than praying in my understanding, I prayed in the Spirit. And as I began to pray in the Spirit, I began to be conscious of what I was saying, and I just spoke it out. It's how the Lord whispered to me in that moment. He said, as the time draws near, this will all become clear. Now, when he said that, I knew exactly what he was talking about, and it had nothing to do with the Sunday service. I was being selfless. I was seeking the kingdom, and in the middle of seeking the kingdom, he gave me something that I'd been asking for. Don't you worry about receiving the thing that you need. God knows what you need. You've already asked him. You just keep seeking the kingdom, and God will come through. So in that moment, I knew I'd been on a journey, and I was looking for the fullness of the purpose of that journey. And I knew in that moment that the things that I had been thinking weren't exactly what he had been thinking. And when he just gave me that little truth, in a moment I knew that the time was drawing near, where I would understand all that God had been doing in my life over the last few years. And so I just kind of put it on a shelf. He didn't ask me to pray for it. He didn't ask me to seek it. He says, as the time draws near, it would all become clear. So I just kept right on doing me. Preached the next morning. The next week was Thanksgiving. Dad was here. He got up Sunday morning after Thanksgiving. That'd be November the 25th, and he was going to preach. And in the middle of preaching, he looks over at me and he says, I could have told you this at the house the other day, but it just seemed more appropriate to just wait until today. Always seems more appropriate, rather than telling you something in the privacy of your home that you could deal with personally, to go do that in front of people. Great idea. If I might just throw this out, some of you, you're going to have to get more comfortable with God working in a crowd, because he has some things to say to you that he's not going to tell you in a back room, because he wants everybody to hear what he tells you so we can all rejoice when we see him do it. And so in that place, he just repeated what the Lord had said to me the week before. And so I just sat on it. But not only was I sitting on it, Streams was sitting on it. Because some things don't just involve you. They involve others. And what God does for you that is good for you will be good for everyone else. He does all things well. And so now it's January the 31st. I'm walking on a track. This place near my house is called The Trails. It's a rec center. It's where I go to try and stay healthy. And so I'm just looping this track, and I'm just meditating on the scriptures that we'll be covering on Sunday. And as I was meditating on 2 Chronicles chapter 1 and verse 9, I got to a place in that text, actually in the beginning of that text, where as I just began to say it, the Spirit of the Lord fell on me on a track. And I had to go to the bathroom because I began to just weep like a blithering idiot. And there was a promise in there that Solomon was praying. And he said, now I will basically begin to see those things that you promised my father David. And I didn't get what all that meant. I just knew as I said that text, as I began to meditate on that text, there was something generational that I was grappling with. There was something that I was having to just kind of absorb the potential of, and I didn't know exactly what it meant. And so I sat on it. And then on February the 5th, you will have seasons where God will just begin to supernaturally speak to you when there's something supernatural that he wants you to do. God doesn't speak all the time. But when he does, we reverence that word and we hang on to that word. It was just a particular special season in my life. If he's about to move you across the country, he's not going to get you to just do it on a whisper. And so now it's February the 5th. I'm climbing, I'm in a lift going to the highest peak in North America to ski down. It was exhilarating. I'm getting up there, the wind just begins to swirl, all the snow is going crazy, a little bit like here. And by the way, honey, if you're watching this, it's really not that hot. I think it's gotten cooler since we've been gone, actually. There's a beautiful sense of season in the air. And so there I was in the swirl. And in that place, the Spirit of the Lord declared to me, he said, you did it. And I thought, I did it. I'm at the top. I made it. Now I got to go down. And I made it to the bottom, and I picked up Ab. She didn't go up top, and we went over to eat. And as I was standing in line to get my Mile High burger, now the Spirit of the Lord yelled at me. He said, "You did it." And I knew in that moment that my time in Denver had come to a conclusion. Which is real exciting, except I had no idea where I was supposed to go. And so then on Friday, March the 22nd at 2:51, as I was awoken and I went downstairs to pray, I just began to pray in my family room. My house has multiple levels. There are these things called basements when you get further than Florida North. And I was praying at this first level, and I just felt the Spirit of the Lord whisper to me, "Go deeper." And so I didn't just go deeper in prayer. In my house, if I got a little louder in that space, they would hear me. So I not only had to go deeper, I had to go deeper. And so I went deeper down into the basement. And as I began to pray, I just saw, all I can call it is a flash. I could describe what I had seen, but I hadn't seen it. And in that moment of prayer, I just saw myself back here. And I didn't know exactly what to do with it. I burned the plows. I said I'm never coming back, not because I didn't love everybody or love my home. It's because God called me to a place, and I believe when he calls you somewhere, you burn the plows. So now I had to figure out, how am I supposed to return when I burn the plows? So that was March the 22nd. It took me until June the 23rd to send my dad an email figuring out exactly what and how this was all supposed to go for me. And by the way, let me just throw this out. Sometimes you're not always in a big rush. God's word will keep. Some of you think, well, I didn't do that last week, so no, your time hasn't passed. What God commanded you to do, that word that he gave you to fulfill, there is time to complete it. It didn't go away. The promise that he made you, the promise that he declared over your family, that promise remains. You say, yeah, but I didn't get this right. The promise remains. But I didn't get that right. The promise remains. The promise remains. And so now we find ourselves here, standing in the land where the Lord God called me to return to. And I believe that just as you are in this house, and there is a promise that God has for you, that I'm in this house, and there's a promise that God has for me. And together we're all going to experience the fullness of the promises that God has made us all. Because there is a land where God would place you. There is something that God would have you do in the place where God has called you to be. And place matters. It's not just what we do. It's in the place where we do it. It matters. And he gives us all these promises. But then he uses this word if. He says, I will establish you as my people, as a holy people, a people to myself, he says, if you keep my commandments and you follow my ways. For whatever reason, in our generation, we seem to have an issue with commandments and ways. We have spent sermons, we write blogs, we have conversations with our children that almost suggest that commandments are bad, that principles are to be avoided, that we live our truth, we do our thing, and it'll just all work out. Could I just let you know it won't just all work out? Some of you are living in the middle of a consequence and you think it's going to just work out. It's not going to work out until you walk away from what you're doing that created the consequence and get back in that place where you are following God's ways. Because only in the middle of God's ways will you find the promise. God's promise isn't in the middle of doing your own thing. It's in the middle of doing his thing. We do a disservice to each other when we speak in ways that suggest, that take the urgency of following God away. Jesus said it this way in John chapter 15 and verse 12. He said, keep my commandments. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And you should bear fruit, and your fruit should remain, so that whatever you ask the Father in my name, he may give it to you. What was the catalyst to receiving an answered prayer? That you bear fruit. There is no answered prayer without fruit that remains. The fruit that remains, bearing fruit, comes first. It is fulfilling the if of the proposition that God has given to you. What was the command? That you love one another. But not love one another according to the love that the world has defined. Rather, we love one another according to the way that he loved people. See, Jesus didn't love people by just saying, do whatever you want to do. I'll work it out. Jesus didn't say, live any way that you want to, because I'm going to go die on the cross for every stupid thing that you would do, and don't ever worry about your lifestyle, because mine's the only one that matters. What he said was, I'm going to do what you can't do, and then I'm commanding you to do the thing you can do. We could not live perfectly. We could not die as a sinless lamb. He did that for us. That's this beautiful thing that we see called grace. When you see in your gospel the word if, it is attaching two amazing components, grace and faith. Grace is that promise that God made all by himself. You did nothing to deserve God to promise you an amazing life. You did nothing for God to promise you his blessings. He chose that all by himself. That is the grace of God. You can't earn it. You could not deserve it. That's God all by himself. But when he said if, now all of a sudden he requires this thing called faith. Faith is not just believing that Jesus did it all so that I could have everything that I want. Faith is believing that Jesus did it all so that I can have the desires of my heart, knowing that those desires are going to shift as I do what he's called me to do. It's fascinating, the more that we follow God, how what we want changes. Have you noticed that? Have you noticed the more that you follow God as you follow him, the thing that you want actually changes? And now when you're living in the middle of doing what God's called you to do, you ask him for the thing that's now a desire of your heart. And he answers you. What is the catalyst? Obedience. He says, love people as I have loved you. How did Jesus love people? He would see people in their deepest need, and he would say, I forgive you, I do not condemn you, and then what? Now go and sin no more. So he didn't justify the sin. He didn't say that it doesn't matter what you did. What he said was, I'm going to give you mercy and not judge you for the stupid thing that you did. So we're going to pull you out of judgment. But here, now I'm going to give you grace to not do it again. What is that? Go and sin no more. Isaiah chapter 35 and verse 8, the prophet prophesied of this time that we would live in. He said, there shall be a highway, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall belong to those who walk on the way. See, Jesus would live this life and show us the way. We get to this place at the end of the law, and we realize, I can't do it. I cannot actually do this. This isn't something that I can perform. And now there was a hopelessness between where we were and where God was. And the prophet made this prophecy that when you get to the place where you recognize that you can't do everything you need to do to get back to God, there will be a highway in that place. And that highway that gets you from where you are to where God is this highway that he calls the way of holiness. And we used to sing about it. Now we don't sing about it. Now we just sing about whatever. I keep hearing voices in my head that say I'm not enough. Wah, wah, wah. I was driving down the road the other day. I'm a little bit of a tree hugger. I guarantee you, you are rednecker than me. And it said, stop global whining. I thought it was warming, so I was kind of paying attention. No, stop global whining. We have come to this place where we just whine about being told to change our ways. Oh, they're judging me. No, they're not judging you, trying to help you. Trying to bring you from where you are to where God wants you to be. We don't sing there's a highway to heaven anymore. None can walk up there but the pure in heart. Remember that one? I keep hearing. No. There's a highway. None can walk up there. See, sometimes we're trying to quiet the voices, and all the voice is conviction trying to keep us from going down a road that's going to kill us. And we think it's going to change it if we reframe conviction and call it condemnation. Conviction is not condemnation. Conviction is the movement of the Spirit of God in your life trying to save you from destruction. In Matthew chapter 7 and verse 12, Jesus said it like this. He said, whatever you want people to do to you, do you also to them. Do you want people to exploit you? Don't exploit them. Do you want your spouse to be faithful to you? Be faithful to them. Do you want your kids to love you? Love them. Do you want your kids to spend time with you? Spend time with them. But then he goes on and he broadens the conversation. Now he takes it into a much more spiritual place. He said, enter by the narrow gate. For wide is the gate, and easy is the path that leads to destruction. And many enter by that gate. But the gate is narrow, and the path is hard that leads where? To life. And those who find it are few. And when we're talking to our accountant and they tell us we're spending too much, we take that as counsel. When we're talking to our coach and he wants us to shift the way we hold our hands so that we can hit a ball further, we take that as coaching. But when the preacher tells us from the gospel that there is a way that is called holiness and there is a gate that is narrow, we think that's judging us. And an entire generation has believed a lie so that an entire generation is marching with a whole bunch of would-be Christians to a place that's called destruction, not life. There are commandments that we are to follow if we are to enjoy the blessing that is in the land. God has a blessing for you, and He's given you the way, and He's given you commandments that will take you there. All the time we're I want to follow the Spirit of the Lord. I want the Lord to speak to me supernaturally. Do what you know to do first. Like, you're not going to hear His quiet whisper when you're in the middle of the cacophony of noise of the world. Like, there are times we have to back up and get outside of what the world is telling us so that through the quiet on that way we can hear the Spirit whisper. And it'll lead us to life. He'll make us, establish us a people unto Himself if we keep His ways, if we keep His commands. And then He says that people will actually fear us. Now let's talk about what this looks like in 2019, because I'm assuming that we're not talking about walking around with a sword and a shield where people shudder when we come down the hall. But He says people will fear us. I just would like to remind you, the only person who fears light is darkness. So it's not the person next to you in church who fears you. It's the darkness outside that fears you. It's when you step into a room full of ungodly people planning ungodly things that when you step in, they suddenly change their conversation because you just walked in. It is a work team that might seek to deceive or deploy something that's a little unruly that when you walk in, sit at the table, all of a sudden the plans change. Why? Because they fear that you will not approve of what they are doing, and they know that with you, hope just walked through the door. They know that when you just came down that hallway, hope just showed up. Justice just showed up. That we can make a difference wherever we find ourselves. And in that moment, darkness, what? It fears us. It seems like we're not as scary as we used to be. Because we look just like the world. Acts chapter 16 and verse 19, the Apostle Paul, he'd been on a journey. He's preaching the gospel. And he's preaching the gospel in this place. And in the middle of this place, there was a young lady who had been possessed of the devil to do the work of the devil for her owners who had enslaved her. Do you see everything wrong about that? Everything wrong about that. A group of people not willing to do something evil, so they enslave someone or exploit them to do their evil bidding. Paul perceives that she's in bondage. And he cast the devil out of her. And the devil left. The devil actually left. And then she could not, because she would not, do the evil bidding of her masters anymore, and they were furious. And so in Acts chapter 16 and verse 19, it says, when they saw that their hope of gain was gone, they seized Paul and Silas, they dragged them into the marketplace, brought them before the rulers, and they said, these men are disturbing our city. I want you to just consider what just happened. They set someone free so that that person would now not declare evil over anyone else in the city, but there were a few power brokers that took offense to that because there was much gain to be lost. And they were upset, and it was these power brokers that said, these men are disturbing our city. What is that? It means they feared them. They wanted to shut them down because they were scared of what they were going to continue to do. There's something about you walking around with the light so that wherever you go, you shut evil down. There's something about you having conversations with people that get them off of a road that's leading to destruction, and you get them on a road that leads to light. And now all of a sudden, the darkness is frustrated. But could I just say, you have no authority that you've been given. You don't walk in the authority that you have been given when you don't walk the way. The authority is not an entitlement. The authority is what we experience when we walk on that path, on that way that God has given us to walk on. Jesus commanded us, cast out devils. And yet we see a moment where his disciples couldn't do so. Commanded the church to cast out devils, yet we see a moment where these itinerant Jewish preachers' kids were going around trying to cast the devil out of things and people. And they yelled at this one guy to try and cast the devil out of him. And in Acts chapter 19 and verse 15, it said the evil spirit spoke back and said, Jesus I know, and Paul I recognize, but who are you? I hear this I say all the time. All the time. You're like, well, we don't really deal with that today. No? We don't deal with the devil today? Maybe the devil doesn't talk back in a way that you hear him, but let me just say something. When you walk into your household where you have authority and you cast the devil out, he doesn't leave, he just talked back. When you said leave in the name of Jesus and he doesn't go anywhere, he just said no. We have to live in such a way where the power of God follows us so that when we say come out, something actually leaves. Could we just be spiritual for a minute? When we're singing about the blind seeing, when we're singing about the lame walking, when we're singing about the deaf can hear, do you realize that's for real? Do you realize that is our opportunity? That is our God-given authority, that where we go, we command life and it happens? And yet, we don't see it. There is a way. There is a way. There is a command that if we will live by these commands and these ways, we will see the promise of God in our generation in the land where he has called us. And some of you, you're listening, you're like, I get it, but I don't get it. I don't get it. Because you think that things that you have done will keep you from the promises of God. You think that because that marriage didn't work out, that suddenly the presence of God has left your life and now there's no future for you. God's plan didn't change. See, there's something here when we walk on that way, when we keep his commandments, when we live in such a way that evil is literally afraid of us. I don't want the devil to look at me and say, who are you? I don't want to walk in my house when I know that the devil is moving in my house, when he's acting and he's trying to blind my kids. I don't want to say, come out. I don't want to say, get out, and he stays. I want to be able to walk into my house and declare the fullness of God in it. And some of us, because it hasn't happened, we think, well, it's not possible. And then we think it's something about us. No, it's not something about you. It's something we need to do. It's not back here that is keeping you from right now. It's right now. It's not the past. It's the present. A moment walking in darkness has no power. If you walked in darkness and you find yourself in the light, the darkness has no power over you. He says in this moment, he will make you. He will make you abound in prosperity. We're chasing it all the time, chasing every dream and vision. He will make you. You. You say, not me. You. The singer, no. You. He will make you to abound in prosperity. I don't mean TV preacher prosperity where we're talking jets and columns. I'm talking about fullness. I'm talking about every desire of your heart being fulfilled. Not every desire that was created by the world. Not every carnal desire that you saw someone else have, so now you wanted that. I'm talking about the desires of your heart that you have because you're following Him. That's what kind of prosperity I'm talking about. But I would like to add, it does look like something. It's not just all inside. Abound, He will make you. And some of you just can't see it. In Luke chapter 4 and verse 8, Jesus said it like this. He said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because He has anointed me to proclaim the gospel to the poor, to proclaim liberty to the captive, recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty those who are oppressed. Declare freedom, set at liberty those who are oppressed. I love those moments where I can see what I need. I know exactly what it is. I just don't have the strength to open the door. And God just declares and the door opens. Those are awesome moments. Like you're just there, you know, and the door, and it's awesome. But I'll tell you where I get tripped up the most is when I'm in a place that I can't see. And He has to set me at liberty. See, there are some of you that the gate hasn't opened because you don't even know where the gate is. You're just sitting in the dark and you're frustrated and you're confused and you're codependent or you're struggling with some kind of a temptation or you just can't see your way out. And for you, I would love to say it's always just a door that flings open and you step through it, but sometimes He's setting you at liberty. And you need to take the next step. There's always a step you can see. For some of you, it's just open your eyes. Just open your eyes. Some of you, it's just step forward just a little because He's setting you at liberty. He is leading you. Though you walk through the valley of the shadow of death, fear no evil because He's just going to lead you. His rod and His staff, that's His word and His Spirit, they will comfort you. He will comfort you in the hard time when you didn't get it all right, but He's happy that you took the next step. And He's just moving you from step to step, from glory to glory. He's setting you at liberty. He's set you, it's on you, it's heavy, but He's setting you free. Some were healed at the spoken word. Others were healed as they went. I don't care if it's spoken or going. I just want you to see healing. Set them free. You. He will make you abound with prosperity. And then I love this part here. Because we're in the land, we're abounding, everybody's scared of us, it's awesome. And He says, I'll make it rain in its season. Now, what I wish is that every season was perpetual prosperity. That there was only the season of harvest. It's harvest time. Always. Always, forever, perpetually harvest time. Sometimes the season is plowing. You parents catch hold of this. Plowing. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6, train up a child in the way they should go. When they are old, they will not depart from it. We parents are getting impatient because we think old means 12. I mean, they finish nursing and we're expecting them to obey. There is a season in parenting that's just plowing. It's just plowing and plowing and plowing. And then sometimes we've plowed all we can plow. And now we're watering. We're just watering. You say, how do you know it's time to water? Because I've plowed all I can plow. They might not be doing it, but they know what they should be doing. At the point that they know what they should be doing, they're just not doing it. Now I'm watering. Because I've already plowed. They have the information. They have the gospel in their heart. It just hadn't shown up to their feet and hands yet. So what am I doing? I'm just watering. What does that mean? I'm praying over them. I'm continuing to be an example so that they do, not just as I say, but as I do. I saw this so clearly the other day. My son started driving. Started driving. Gets in the car. We start going off, and I'm like, slow down. Like, oh, I thought, no. Rolls through a stop sign. What are you doing? Well, I mean, red light, speeds up. Why? He says, Dad, you run 50 red lights a day. And when's the last time you rolled back at the stop sign? Never, ever. So then I had to say, you know what? I'm going to teach you how to drive right. When you learn how to drive, you can drive as stupid as you want to, but until then, you're going to do what I tell you. Now, let me just say this. That might be hysterical when we're talking about driving. But what about life? See, sometimes plowing is digging up everything we've demonstrated. They're 14, they're 18, they're 31, married, and they're treating their spouse like you treat yours. And now we have to plow. We thought we were ready. No, we're having to go back to plowing because now we have to rework some things, reframe some things. Pastor Reggie always talks about 3 enemies: the world, the flesh, and the devil, right? The devil, we just resist him. We just cast him out. He has to go. But what about the flesh? The flesh is that thing we have to renew. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. We have to constantly be renewing. Why? So that we can demonstrate what is right. There's plowing that's involved in that. The rain comes in its season. Sometimes we're asking God for rain, and He knows it's not time for rain yet because you haven't plowed and planted. Why would He bring the rain if you haven't plowed and planted the seed yet? See, I don't know if you've been paying attention a little bit in your walk with God, but His ways are higher. And God does all things well. And God looks at your life and He knows He made you a promise, but He's not raining because you haven't plowed and you haven't planted yet. Sometimes we're praying for a harvest and we haven't planted any seed. We're talking about all the things that God is doing that we don't see. He's not doing anything that you haven't seen if you haven't plowed and planted. The only time God is doing what we cannot see is when we've obeyed Him and planted what He told us to plant, the time He told us to plant it, after we plowed the ground that had to be plowed so it could accept the seed He told us to plant. And sometimes we just find ourselves in the middle of nothingness, and we think, well, this is just the season that God has me in. I'm just in this place where God's not moving on my behalf. God's waiting on you to do the thing He called you to do so He could do the thing He promised to do. We use examples in the world. You know, Paul, he faced all these tribulations and all these trials. Yeah, he did. But in Acts chapter 28 and verse 31, it says very clearly that the Apostle Paul proclaimed the gospel of the kingdom of God and teaching about Jesus with all boldness and without hindrance. There was a season and there was a season. Oh, yeah. What about Job, though, Sean? What about Job? He lived in blessing. The devil came against him, and in a matter of what is described as months and days, so let's just make it 14 months, he had misery, utter misery, but it was followed by 140 years of the most amazing life you could ever imagine. If you want to talk about Job, talk about the 140 year of blessing. Was there a miserable season in there? Sure there was. Sure, life's not perfect. But let's not think that the imperfection is God's will for the rest of our life. Let's not get so hung up that this is where we just decide to settle, is here. What about Joseph? What about Joseph? He lived as his dad's favorite for like 16 years. And then for 14 years, he went through what we would call misery. And then, though, he had 70 years of prosperity ruling in Egypt. Favorite, 15 years, 16 years, 70 years of prosperity. I mean, like, the majority of his life was awesome. And yet we want to use the miserable seasons in someone's life as justification for an entire lifetime of our misery. Don't get confused there. There will be seasons that are difficult. Plowing is difficult. I just would like to say plowing is difficult. But there's something exhilarating when you have plowed in a season of plowing. And you have planted in a season of planting. And then all of a sudden, you've done all you can do to stand. And now you just water. And you know God is doing what cannot be seen. You know that God is working a work that is about to begin to grow. Because 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 6 says this. Paul said, I planted and Apollos watered, but it was only God who gave the increase. So neither is he who plants nor he who waters anything, but only God who makes it grow. Only God. See, they're in this season in our text. They're about to step from the wilderness to the promised land. But here's the fear. They should have done it 37 years ago. This is after 40 years in the wilderness. They were only supposed to be in the wilderness for 3 years. There was a 3-year time in the wilderness where God was preparing them. I don't mean wilderness in the way that a lot of you would maybe think wilderness. People use wilderness in a bad context. I kind of like it in a good context. It's a place of hearing from God. It's a place where the mountaintop was. It's a place where you receive His word. It's a place where water comes out of rocks. It's a place where even the soles of your shoes don't even run out. It's a place where manna rains down from heaven, and He shows you that you won't live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. See, there's a beauty in the wilderness. There's not death and destruction and entrapment in the wilderness. In the wilderness, they were going to have to fight a battle. God knew they weren't ready for it, so He took them around it. Why? Because they weren't ready. He was preparing them, and then He got them to a place where they could fight the battle, and they fought and they won. The wilderness was a beautiful place of victory. And even after all that, here was the problem. They didn't get it. See, some of you are living in a season that you don't understand. And instead of understanding the season that you're in, you're not doing the thing that you should be doing. You might be in a season of planting. Stop watering, start planting. You might be in a season of plowing. Stop watering and start plowing. Do some work. Recognize the real battle that's in front of you. Because they thought the battle was Pharaoh coming at them and God was about to part the Red Sea. The real battle was that they didn't trust God. And then they didn't trust God again when they were hungry. And then they didn't trust God again when they were thirsty. And they never, ever learned what God was trying to tell them because they wouldn't listen to the gospel. And how many times do we step into the house of God and the word of God is preached and we push it away when he's trying to help us because he has life for us? So they stood at the edge of the promised land and they said, we can't do it. Even though all that God had done, they said, we can't do it. And so they wandered around for 37 years, God being merciful to them, still feeding their complaining selves, still clothing their whining selves, still keeping their shoes from running out, even though they were yapping the whole way. And now that generation falls off and another generation stands tall at the edge of the river. And they're about to go in, and these are the commands. Do what God tells you to do, and you will experience his promise. That was the command. You want to know how to win? Obey God. How do you win at home? Obey God. How do you win at work? Obey God. How do you win at life? Obey God. How do you experience revival? Obey God. They just obey God. Psalm 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of God, and upon his law he meditates day and night. And that person that does all of that shall be like a tree planted by streams of water, and his fruit it yields in its season, not out of season, in its season, and his leaf doesn't even wither, and in everything that he does, he prospers. Why? Because the Lord makes him prosper. What is the promise that God has made to you? Walk in it. Walk in it. There are promises that God has made to us. You're looking at me up here and some of you are thinking like transition. There is no transition going on here. There's no retirement going on here. There's no restructuring going on here. This is a season of a double portion. This is a season of fathers and sons and mothers and daughters. This is a season where we're going to see the fullness of the revival of God sweep through this place. This is a season where God brings us all together, white and brown and young and old, and he just keeps pouring out and he keeps raining down. Because God has something for us. And we're going to see it in the land of the living. Thank you. God bless you all.